reason why I wrote this chapter specifically was because when you're in a place where you have to change, because before this happened, you already made the point in your life where I have to change or I'm losing something. Like I have to change or I'm losing my family. I have to change or I'm losing my kids. Like there are three things that I changed immediately after I went to Centerpoint. First one was I can't go any place that causes me anxiety. The second thing I changed was I'm never arguing with my wife again. Like I'll sit there and I'll eat shit burgers all day. And the third thing was I have to make sure everybody has an equal voice in our home. So I'd sit there and instead of talking all the time, I had to make sure that everyone was able to talk, Yeah. So it's like, those are like the three biggest things. And it's like, when you have to change, you have to do like all this stuff, is like, you have to put specific things in your life and like your surroundings to either keep yourself good, or, whatever.
Yeah. I'm just going to keep that in the podcast.
Okay.
And this is Call for Fire, episode 6. That was a good intro to this.
Yeah.
Because normally I kind of ask you like, hey, so why did you write this chapter? Well, you kind of knocked it out right there.
Yeah. And before you read this, I'm just going to say, I hate this chapter.
A disclaimer on the disclaimer.
The disclaimer on the disclaimer. I hate this chapter. Like, if there's a chapter that I didn't want in the book, that's probably the first one I'm thinking of. This chapter sucks, in my opinion.
Sucks because it's good.
Sucks because it's good, and sucks
the truth.
Yeah, and you're in a place where you have to change. So it's like, man, what the hell, man?
Yeah. Yeah, so the disclaimer rule, number 5, I'll go ahead and just get into it and read it. And since you've already kind of talked about why you wrote the chapter, that'll make a little bit more sense after people hear this. And if you've already read it, pull out your book, read along with us here. When putting back... Sorry, let me pick this up so I can have the microphone in front of me and read this at the same time. When putting your life back together, you will begin to realize all the things you need to change. This can seem overwhelming. There will be people who doubt you and no longer believe in you, creating a lonely place in your heart. Life is hard for the one rebuilding their life, as well as anyone and everyone who loves you. A lot of pain has taken place. You can't change others, but you can change you. Believing and knowing yourself is the most important part. However, knowing yourself, loving yourself, and most importantly, knowing you can be safe and sober-minded is super important. Surrounding yourself with people who want you to be successful in creating your new life and your new you are vitally important. There are other guidelines you will need to adopt to become free. For me, these are some of the guidelines I started living by. Pray and seek God in everything you do. Only go places that make you a better person. Learn the principles of good behavior. Start to study yourself as if you didn't realize who you are. This approach creates an honest and open self-dialogue. Be relentless in being humble to the point that every blessing you get, no matter how big or small, makes your life better. The disclaimer. Beware of the urge to have someone of the opposite sex come along you in your journey of recovery. While seeking recovery, overcoming the urges created from your loneliness is a big part of being okay with being you. Remember, regardless of where you go and what you do, there will always be you. You cannot escape from you, but you can escape from those things that tear down the greatness within you. Know that when you attempt to apply healthy guidelines to your life, you may feel lonely, a bit awkward, and things will be weird, but you will be okay. Breakthrough awaits you. Verses for the day. Work it out. 1 John 3:1. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it did not know him. 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. And I'll go ahead and read this and we'll put a pin in it and come back to it a little bit later. But this is the work it out question prompt of the day. What Bible verses can you find that show Christ's great love for you? What steps are you going to take to ensure that you stay on the road to recovery? begin to love yourself and protect yourself from unhealthy relationships. The disclaimer rule. That is a tough one, but it is a good one. And things that are tough and good, it's typically because it's truth. When it comes to like looking at something that is objectively true, there's some hard pills to swallow in it sometimes. Mm-hmm. And the truth of it is, and like to kind of fast forward towards the end of the chapter, if your whole entire life you have been dependent on something to feel like yourself, a substance, specifically for, you know, kind of the context of this, like getting clean and safe and sober, there is a draw to cling to something and kind of create this new codependency. And it's very easy to do that with a person, especially a person of the opposite sex. Mm-hmm. And like, especially if it's maybe someone you've already had a relationship with and now they see you clean and sober and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to give this guy another try. But mm-hmm. the issue is that person may not have changed at all. Mm-hmm. The people around you may not have changed at all. And some people can develop an unhealthy balance or an unhealthy relationship with other people because of this new lifestyle. And it's easy to cleave to and cling to someone of the opposite sex because mm-hmm. that's what we were designed to do. Like, yeah, you're designed to have that. What is the Greek word? Or maybe it's Hebrew. Azer, I think it's their Azer Nebego or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's like the word that the Bible uses for like a spouse. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're designed to have that partner in crime.
Yeah, I think what's interesting though, when you're touching on it, is you're putting yourself together, and there are people who are giving you compassion, and you can develop a kind of like innocent intimacy moment that you don't mean to happen. You know, especially like when you're putting your marriage back together. You know, the first thing that I was told to do is you need to have accountability partners, you know, yeah, that are going to hold you accountable. And for me, I need to have people who are ruthlessly honest. Like if they see yep. something, I was like, you got to call me out on this because I don't want to go back to where I was. Because where I was, it was my rock bottom moment. And I don't want to go back to where I was. So you have to come to a place where you're giving people permission to come into you and be like, hey man, this isn't good. What I'm looking at here, you know? Yeah. And
not everyone deserves that permission though.
No, you have to be very selective. You have to be, the Bible talks about wise counsel. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about wise counsel, you need to have someone like the qualities that you're going to embrace, like integrity. Are they the kind of person they want to become? What are their qualities? What are their strong suits? Because I have like a wheel of people that I depend on. You know, I have someone who is incredible with volunteering that helps people. You know, I have someone who is really good with money. I have someone who is really good in faith. I have someone who is really good in like handyman work. I have someone who's, you know, I have someone that is good in like a multitude of different areas. I don't just like count on one person. Mm-hmm. I count on like, I would say like 8 or 9 people. And, you know, because when you're putting your life back together, it's like, it takes a village to raise a child, right? Yeah. So when you're broken, you're putting your life back together. How many people do you think you need to go from broken to healthy?
Yeah.
And you're trying to put these hard boundaries in place. Like for me, I suffer with PTSD and like severe anxiety. And when I embrace rejection, I can get really depressed really fast. Mm-hmm. So when I'm putting my life back together, I was like, I can't go anywhere that I'm going to cause myself anxiety on purpose. I can't go anywhere that's going to, induce my PTSD. Like, that means like if I'm somewhere where I smell like a lot of like gunpowder, like the residue of, not so much like the scene of fireworks. It's the smell for me. It's the smell of gunpowder in the air. I'm just like, as soon as I smell that, man, I'm just like, it takes me back to places where, I tried really hard to forget. I'm just like, man, I don't want to do that. And the accountability piece is like super important. I can tell you, like, I have a thing on my phone, that if I look at porn, like, there are people in my life that will get a email of, dude, this dude's looking at porn. We'll get that email. Jenny, Pastor Jesse, Emil Moore, Danny Brooks.
That's a tough group of people.
Yeah. So I'm just,
They're not going to let you slide.
Yeah. So they're being like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Especially your wife is like, comes up to you, is like, I thought we didn't have a problem with this anymore. What is the deal here?
Yeah. It's interesting that you say this, the smell. Smell is actually one of the strongest memory ties to our brain. Your olfactory glands in your nose that are tied into parts of your brain. A lot of people think that there's one part of your brain that stores memories, but all your different parts of your brain store different types of memories. Mm-hmm. And the olfactory glands are things that directly tie smells to memories in your brain. And they're actually one of the strongest things. That's why there's that nostalgia. You might walk by somebody in a crowd and smell a perfume, and it'll take you back instantly to this moment in your life. So it's no wonder that the smell of that GSR or gunpowder or something in your nose brings back such strong and vivid memories of what triggers your PTSD. Mm-hmm. The smells of alcohol for some people. I was talking to Chelsea Laughlin on my podcast, and we were talking about smoking cigarettes. And
I'm just going to tell you, like, I think like the moment of stress, the first thing I crave is a cigarette.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, sometimes that smell is very off-putting to me, but then sometimes I'll get a whiff of a specific cigarette. It's like a Camel menthol. And I'll smell it and I'll be like, Jesus, I need a cigarette. Like that smell comes back to so many things tied to me that my brain says are good. And the smell thing is really tough. And this comes down to something that you get to a little bit later of your surroundings, mm-hmm. and those rules of things that trigger, setting those boundaries around things that trigger those old behaviors. And it could be something as simple as a smell. Yeah. Because it is so tied to who we are as a person. Like, mm-hmm. those smells are there for a reason, to remind us of things. So that's really interesting. And, where you start this off at is it seems like such a simple thing, but it is such a deep thing. You say on the first paragraph, you will begin to realize all the things you need to change. Mm-hmm. And I had underlined that, and then I went back and kind of wrote out why that stood out to me so much. And we were chatting about it, but there are so many things in our life that we could change. Mm-hmm. We could change our hair color. We could change our diet. We could change an infinite number of things in our life that could have a positive or negative effect. But then there are things that need to change. Mm-hmm. And you were very specific with the language you use there of the things that need to change, mm-hmm. because there's a big difference between what you could change and what you need to change. And sometimes you really have to look at a list. You need to write those things down of changes to be made, mm-hmm. and kind of sort them into categories of like, is this a primary or a secondary issue? Yeah. Is this a key or is this a lock? Mm-hmm. Like, because when you're looking at these problems that you have in your life, let's say the issue is alcoholism, and mm-hmm. that's a door. Yeah. And you've chosen to have that door in your life and close that door. Mm-hmm. Well, then you have to put locks on that door.
Right.
And the issue is that certain things in your life are keys to that lock. Mm-hmm. You created the lock, you have the key, and you can throw that key away and it will magically end up back in your pocket again if you are not careful. So it's like looking at those things that need to change versus could change.
Yeah, I think specifically the first chapter. So when my PTSD relapsed and I went to Centerpoint and I was trying to figure out how am I going to put this thing together here? How am I going to do this? And then, me and my wife separated for a while and she's like, you need to figure this out. And Pastor Jesse was counseling me and Jenny at the time. And I had to figure out, number one, am I still going to stay married? And number two was like, how am I going to be a better father? How am I going to guide my kids on how we're going to do this, And when I started putting my life back together, two things really came out was the difference between a thermostat and a thermometer. And I needed to make sure that my kids had an equal voice in the house, just like I did. I needed to make sure my wife was taken care of. I needed to be selfless instead of selfish. Mm-hmm. And when you're putting your life back together, you need to have like a ruthless inventory that you are doing not on your own. And the reason why I say that is when you're doing an inventory of your life, sometimes we're not honest with ourselves. Let's be completely honest.
I think rarely.
Well, rarely. So when you're
rarely are we truthfully, are we brutally honest with ourselves? We're pretty soft on ourselves sometimes.
Yeah. So when you are putting your life back together and you're taking a ruthless inventory of your life and you be like, I want to be a better father and I want to be a better husband and I want to be a better friend. So when you're putting all this stuff together, you cannot do this inventory by yourself.
Yeah.
Because the reason why you don't want to do that by yourself is because you don't know all the answers to yourself. And the reason why that is if you got to this point where you're putting your life back together, you touched on this before we started talking, is because you were involved with 100% of your life's choices and your decisions and where you are. So when you're putting your life back together, you most likely will keep things in there that you probably should get rid of.
Yeah.
And I think like the first podcast we talked about was anger, right? I get angry and I can get angry and I can get depressed on like a flip of the hat if I feel rejected, right?
Rejection's a big one for me too.
Yeah.
That leads to anger and leads to acting out. So
when you feel rejection, that's a practice that you need to put into. Like, you have to I understood how to handle rejection because every time I get angry, I got rejected. Every time. That's why I get angry and upset. That's why I get depressed and upset is because of rejection and how I dealt with rejection in the past.
Yeah.
So when you're putting your life back together, the way that you react to people who are close to you is a big part of this too, because you have to ask yourself a question. Like when your wife gets home and she doesn't give you the response that you're looking for, you have an expectation on your loved ones of how they're going to love you. Mm-hmm. And if they come home and they're just like, yeah, the crap, and they're really not acknowledging you. All they're doing is they come home, they're unloading on you and they're venting. And you're just like, I just want a hug and a kiss. What the hell is your problem? Is that really the kind of expectation that you have? What is your reaction in that moment? See, when you put a inventory on all this stuff, your past and how you handled yourself, just like we said, the thermometer and the thermostat, how are you handling yourself and doing all this stuff?
Yeah. Because
the bigger picture is I'm a father, right?
Yeah.
I want I want to make sure my kids are married to a guy that's going to treat them good, right? I want to be an example to my son about how to handle things the way that he should handle things. I want to be an example. I want to be an example to my family. I want to love my wife the way that she should be loved, right?
Yeah.
So you really have to have a goal in mind if you want to be happy and healthy. And happiness is kind of like purposeful and healthy is probably the better way to put it. So when you're putting your stuff together, there's a lot of things in this devotional specifically that are like, I don't like this devotional.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, it's just like grinding teeth for me.
Yeah. I think one of the things that makes this a tough one, tougher than others, is because when you're establishing your boundaries, and we're going to get into talking about the boundaries part aspect of this, because that's really what this boils down to. But it's like determining how much property you want to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have really tight boundaries, really small fenced in area, and everything stays outside of that. And that's all that you get to take care of. Or you can have a big, huge plot of land and it's more to take care of, and it's very open and it's very available and free. But then at the same time, you have to deal with all the stuff that gets in.
Mm-hmm.
This very loose boundary, this very large piece of land to manage versus this smaller piece of land. And at different times in your life, you may be capable of handling more,
mm-hmm.
and at other times, not so much. So it's difficult to figure out like that your boundaries should be set at certain times in your life that look a little different. And sometimes that fence moves,
mm-hmm.
It's why a perfect example of this is it's like people have a fence around their property and then they have a fence around their pool, and
mm-hmm.
they have a fence around their pool. Maybe some of them just because the county makes them, but some of them because it's a more dangerous area.
Yeah.
So it needs to be secured a little differently. And like the further you get, and this is to get away from the hyperbole a little bit and more into a realistic situation. But like the closer you are to your home, the less boundaries you can have. Like the people within your home, like your daughters can know you a lot better than your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Your neighbor can know you a little bit better than someone who lives in another state.
Yeah.
Someone who lives in another state can know you a little better than someone who lives in another country.
Mm-hmm.
And someone who lives in another country can know you a little better than someone who lives on a different planet.
Yeah.
So like there is this continual outward trajectory of boundaries that we set to keep ourselves safe. And especially when you have lived an unsafe lifestyle and never lived with boundaries, it's incredibly difficult to decide that. And it's why you need to have, going back to the disclaimer rule,
mm-hmm.
a very select group of people that you allow around you. And it's not just people of the opposite sex. Like you can have a same-sex friend that is not good for you at this
mm-hmm.
time in your life, that you may have to set boundaries around because either that person doesn't have good boundaries or because that person does not necessarily support the new fences that you're building.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you said the boundaries, and then you also went to like how close people are to you. I think that's very interesting when you talk about your surroundings.
People inside of the fence and people outside of the fence kind of thing.
Yeah. Because I think it's interesting because you kind of have to ask this question about how deep are you going to go into this thing? Like how many things are you going to change? Because when you were talking, I remember having, so in my PTSD relapse, I was really heavily involved in kids' church. I was really, I had the PTSD group going on. I was a deacon in church, and I had like a lot of shame, like trying to get back into church because of my PTSD relapsing. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was like, I let like all this stuff go, and that also like I wasn't embracing myself because I lived in Troy and I hated myself too. So I had like all this stuff going on. But when I was trying to get back, I was like, I had to have certain people around me because of how much shame I had in my life. You know, I was like, man, people are not going to look at me the same. You know, people are going to do all the stuff. But the thing is you need to like go through that shame, because when you hold on to things that make you worse, you hold on to something called false pride, you know, and false pride is like, you're holding on to, well, that's probably the best way to put it. You're holding on to things that make you worse, you know, and that's why you said
Yikes.
You have to have the certain people around you, the right people around you. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a, like you said, like a female that you need to hold on to. You need to get rid of those joy suckers in your life.
Yeah. And I think that it's very important that you specified someone of the opposite sex, because especially as a man, like, and I'm not going to speak for all men, but I'm going to speak for a good amount of men. Like, we want to be wanted. Mm-hmm. We want to be desired. We want somebody who looks to us for that protection and provision. That is love. Like, we want someone, unfortunately, to treat us like a king. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that people are subject to your every whim and will, but it's like you want someone to desire you like a king. And nothing feels better than having the love and the comfort of a woman who sees you as her king, and you as her, and she is your queen. Mm-hmm. And so that desire is there. And when that desire is there and it starts to get fulfilled, it makes you feel powerful, and and it can be a bad power, but it makes you feel important. It makes you feel like you're doing things right. And that can greatly skew your progress and what you're actually seeing and feeling. Because if that woman loves you and loved you at your worst, how much more is she going to love you at your best?
Yep.
And if this new person is only coming into your life when you're at your best, they don't know you at your worst. There's a lot. It's like, hey, I was a bad person. Hey, I was in jail. Hey, I was struggling with substance abuse, is a lot different than, hey, I'm relapsing with my substance abuse. Hey, I got into some trouble with an old friend and I'm going back to jail. Mm-hmm. Hey, I am struggling with rage and I saw red and I thought about hitting someone or something. Like, that person needs to, like, if that person is going to be part of your life, they need to know everything. Mm-hmm. Like, not sugar coated. If you can't tell that person everything, it's not the right person.
Right. And there needs to be like a certain amount of care and a certain amount of accountability going into this. Mm-hmm. Like, I can tell you, like, when I went back to church, I relied heavily on Danny Brooks and his wife. And they checked on me like all the time. I said, hey, coming into church. And Brittany was like really forceful about it. She's like, if I see you with your head down, I'm like, I get it. I'll hold my head up. I get it. Danny's more like the man who put his arm around. He's like, hey man, you're all right. Let me give you a little pep talk.
That is nothing more than a Danny statement. Yeah. Hey man.
Yeah. But they were the ones that, you know, embrace me, make sure I wasn't like living in shame, make sure like I was comfortable. Because when you're getting back into your life and you need to like have hard boundaries, there's going to be like a clumsiness and like a shame to get rid of your shame and your false pride and your ego. And you need to put that stuff aside. And you really need a person or two to like walk you through to make sure that you're good and make sure that, you know, you're putting one step in front of the other, you know, and those people also, you know, they can make sure that you're going in the right direction. If you look at the front of the book, there's a mountain right there. Right there. There's a mountain right there. And that's actually a path. And that mountain right there is Mount Belford that we climbed in the book. And me and Jenny climbed that mountain together. And it was the higher you climb and the higher you get to your goal, the harder it's going to be. And the reason why that is because you're coming closer to breakthrough.
Yeah.
And the harder you get closer to breakthrough, people talk about plateaus. People talk about like all this stuff. And I can tell you, like, when you're climbing a mountain, there's all these switchbacks. So you're like looking at different stuff and you're going, going all the way up in the mountain. And me and Jenny finally got to the top. And we're like, man, we did it. We're like looking down. And Jenny, like, she taps me on the shoulder and she goes like this. And I looked over my shoulder and we had another, I don't know, 800 to 1,000 feet left. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So Jenny, when we were climbing this mountain, she was my accountability partner, going up the mountain and going down the mountain. And it's like, you're doing something that you've never done before, that you are going to have to ask for help. Because if you're going somewhere and you're putting your life back together, you know, you need hard boundaries, you need different surroundings. Because I've never been to Colorado before and I'm climbing a freaking 14,000 foot mountain. Like it's like the 19th or 17th highest peak in America. And I'm going up to like 11% oxygen level. You know, we're in Troy, Missouri. We live at like 500 feet of above sea level. We're living in like the heaviest oxygen. It doesn't take much to breathe in Troy, Missouri. But when you go to like 14,000 feet, it's like, I can tell you, Pastor Jessica can probably tell you, I was sucking on a can of air.
Yeah.
That I was making fun of him for the day earlier that he had to buy canned air. I'm like, suck it up. What are you doing buying canned air? And I was the one sucking on it.
Yeah. And, you know, to someone who lives in that environment, you get acclimated to it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, that's kind of an important part of all of this process, is getting acclimated to your new surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
And until you get acclimated to those new surroundings, you have to set boundaries around where you will let yourself go in those surroundings, where you will let yourself venture and travel by yourself or with others. If you have never been to Colorado and climbed a mountain, trying to do a 14,000 foot summit in a day at 11% oxygen, not smart to do by yourself.
Not smart.
Not smart. So you take someone with you that you trust to walk that path with you. And that way there's at least that second person. That's like your accountability, but that is your protection. That is you are leaning on that person. They're leaning on you. And you have to set some limits around what you're willing to do. Maybe you go do a 5,000 foot peak when you first move out there, and no big deal, because you're by yourself. You can take a little bit of risk. Yeah. But when you don't try to climb 14,000 foot peaks by yourself without any experience. You'd start small.
Yeah.
I think that where a lot of people get messed up is they set their boundaries and then they change their surroundings. And your boundaries should be something that are dictated by your surroundings, not the other way around. And I think that boundaries is one of those things that you think about like Sesame Street. It's like, oh, you got to set your boundaries, Elmo. And it's like, no, this is not a kid's thing. And when people talk down about it, and when people speak poorly about your boundaries, that is an issue of why there is such an issue with people setting boundaries in their lives and what they let themselves to get into. And I think it's important to kind of explore like what boundaries are, how do they work, and why we have them in the first place. And it's really easy to just draw the comparison of boundaries and fences.
Mm-hmm.
and like understanding like what they are, think about it like a fence. If you live in the ghetto, you might have a wrought iron fence that's 10 feet tall with spikes on the top and 3 locking mechanisms to keep out anything and everything. Whereas if you live out in Eolia, Missouri, you might just have a couple sticks that are tied to some other sticks that go around. And then it also dictates like, what are you trying to keep in or out? Do you have a shock wire on that fence? Do you have, you know, like all of those things? So when you're thinking about like, what is a boundary in a metaphorical standpoint, a boundary is essentially a limit of what you allow into your close personal life, like what you allow to affect you. And certain people that might be used to being in close contact with you, like think about it like this. That cup is at the end of my reach if you're watching this. Now, if that cup is something that I don't necessarily want in my life, I might have to keep that cup right at the edge of what I can grasp, because it may be still something that I need, but it could spill and it could get all over my equipment. So I need to keep it far away from me. But if that cup is important to my life, I might bring it a little bit closer and allow it a little bit closer into my life and allow it to be within reach of what I have. So when we're thinking about those fences, this cup is representative of people or things in your life that need to be within reach or need to be just outside of your reach, that maybe you need someone to help you get, or maybe you need maybe it needs to be at the edge of what you should be able to reach in your life. And like, that's really important when it comes to figuring out what level of protection you need in your close quarters.
I remember I was speaking at a mental health conference last month, and there were people that were asking me, were like messaging me and asking me what my thoughts were when I first spoke there. And I was speaking at like when all these people had like survivor stories and like all this stuff. So I was speaking over there. There's a lady that was her son committed suicide. There was a wife there. Her husband committed suicide. There was a dude there that had like medical stuff. And then there was me. And I was just like,
you say that as if like, and then there's me. Like, I don't.
Well, the thing is their stories and what they had to share was powerful.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm sitting there and I'm sharing my story and I'm thinking to myself, man, they went through so much stuff. Sometimes I don't think that we understand like how resilient we are.
Yeah.
And how much we can do things. Here's what I say. Okay. I'll put, this is column A and this is column B. We should probably have like a whiteboard or something, but you did the thing. I'm doing this thing. So let's say this is like all the physical things I can do, right?
Yeah.
My physical goals, I shared with Zach before this, like I want to become like, just like physically fit. I'm not saying I'm out of shape now, but I want to be here long enough that, you know, I see my kids successful in life or whatever. And I want to be there for my wife when we're older, and I want to do all this stuff. So I got to take care of myself, you know? And I'm also like, on Saturday, I'm going to do a 22-mile road march for veteran suicide. Right. And then I'm going to, I don't know, I'm going to be speaking at an equine therapy place on Friday. I'm going to do something else, you know, and I can do all these things that are physical things that I can control. Well, the thing is if I can do like all these physical things right here in this column, I should be able to do all these mental things as well, because all the things over here are hard things to do. So if I can do this, I should be able to do this. I should be able to set boundaries. I should be able to be accountable to people. I should be able to do, you know, have self-control. I should be able to do self-care for myself. The thing is we can do all these things, right? But what blocks us is the distractions that we put in our life. Like this is the distraction, right?
Yeah.
That is my distraction, right? Right now, like the biggest goal that I have in my life is I want to be present for my family. Do you know what I'm doing on Sunday? I'm doing this. My wife is talking to me. I'm like, yeah. I hear you. Okay. Yeah. I hear you. And then my wife says, well, what did I say? Like, I don't know. Going in one ear and out the other, but I hear you. That's like my biggest thing.
Yeah.
You know, because if we can do all this stuff, we should be able to do all this stuff too. But we don't do that. I'll give you another example, right? I think veterans are amazing in how they adapt to things, right?
Yeah.
President Roosevelt said, we do a great job of turning civilians into soldiers, but we suck at turning soldiers back into civilians. Here's what I mean. They went to basic training. You went to AIT. You went to your permanent party. You went to the field. You deployed. You did all this stuff. And then you got out. And now you're trying to identify with civilians when you're a veteran.
We're different people.
Yeah, you're different.
As someone who's never served, like I will hardly understand some of the things that veterans have gone through.
Right. But the thing is with the civilian side of it is where veterans suck at. And here's what I mean by that. PTSD and addiction manifests in many forms, right?
Yes.
So me being a veteran, I can go to Zach and I say, hey man, this is what I'm struggling with. And Zach's like, I get what you're saying. I'm struggling with the same thing. But a lot of veterans can't do that. They're stuck in the distraction. And here's what I mean by that. If they're not a veteran, they don't understand. A lot of addicts do the same thing. If they're not an addict, they don't understand. A lot of people with PTSD are like, if they don't have PTSD, they don't understand. A lot of this book, you mentioned surroundings and boundaries, right?
Yeah. I think that's a pretty prevalent theme in this disclaimer rule.
Yeah. So if you...
And in the first 4 chapters, just not as... This one is definitely.
Right. So there's a guy that goes to our church. He's the CFO of our church, Randy Garner. And Randy is an amazing runner. Like, this dude's an amazing runner. He's in his 60s. Like, he's a great father. He's a great grandfather. He has like great temperament. Like, he's an example that I'm striving to be, right?
Yeah.
So he's not a veteran, you know, but he's calm. He has demeanor. You can tell, like, when you're talking to him, he's taking in the whole conversation. He's an active listener, right? I do not go to Randy. I'm like, dude, you can't teach me anything because you're not a veteran. You know, when I go to Zach, I'm like, hey man, I got to do this nutrition thing, you know, and Zach can say, well, what are you doing for exercise? What are you doing for this? I don't go to Zach. I'm like, hey, you can't teach me anything because you're not a veteran. You know, I think that there are people around us that could help us, but we go to them and we even put a label on them because they can't help us.
Yeah. And that's not just veterans who do that. We do that, us civilian folk.
Well, yeah.
Jordan Peterson, I love the guy, and he's got this thing that he says, and I believe it's in his first book, but he says that always assume that the person you're speaking to knows something that you don't, and that you could learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. Like, if you go into a conversation that you always think that you know more than the person that's sitting in front of you or standing in front of you, that's a pretty shitty place to be in life, that you always have yourself in such high esteem and such high regard that nobody can teach you anything.
Mm-hmm.
I learned stuff from watching my little son, because if you pay attention to what he's doing, I pay attention to a little 2.5-year-old, and I look at him solving his problems, solving his little trying to put my blocks away problem. It's no different. My problems might be a little bit more complex, but at the end of the day, it's the resilience of watching him try to figure it out and work through this little block problem or something, or trying to figure out how to hold his fork so he doesn't drop his mac and cheese, putting it in his mouth, or watching him try to just figure out a new situation. Like, I can learn from that just as much as I can sit down and learn from you. I haven't necessarily been a veteran, but I can learn a lot about resiliency. But if I assume that, oh, because I lost all this weight and I put myself through this difficult situation, I know way more than Mike about working hard, or I know way more about Mike than this or that, that puts us in a terrible place to start a comfortable, safe dialogue.
Right. And I think like when you are establishing the people that you want to place around you, like the surroundings and the culture that you are having with the person that's trying to hold you accountable is so important, because the culture that you are creating in your accountability is like the integrity that you need to have moving forward is so important. Like, that, especially the integrity part, because if I go to Zach and like, hey man, can you help me do a nutrition thing? And Zach knows like, I'm trying to like get to a certain point so my back can be better, and I'm trying not to like do certain things. So I don't even know why I'm doing a 22-mile road march, because I will probably like be hurting for a few days afterwards. But, but the reason why I say integrity is because, let's say Zach puts this nutrition thing in front of me and he's holding me accountable, but I'm not being honest with Zach. Be like, yeah, man. He's like, well, why did you gain some weight? He's like, I don't know. Maybe me going to McDonald's and get a 20-piece McNugget may have had something to do with it. And then Zach was like, why am I trying to be your nutritionist when you can't tell me, when you can't be honest with me in the moment? Because when you're trying to hold someone accountable and they're not telling you like the full story, it's kind of like, I don't know. A lot of healing, I always have to like equate and have the analogy of, let's say I broke my arm, right? And I have a cast on. I don't think that I'm going to like have a lot of things in my life where I'm going to have to use my arm and my hand when I need my hand and my arm to heal. But when you are putting yourself and you're trying to heal emotionally and do all this other stuff, you cannot do the things that hurt you and try to heal at the same time. And that goes the same thing with me going to Zach and saying, hey man, we got to do this nutrition thing, but I'm not losing any weight. And Zach knows for a fact how much body fat I have on, what my weight is, that I'm still working out. Like, he knows like all this stuff that he's putting into me. And he's like scratching his head like, if you're doing all these things, how come number one, you're not losing weight, and number two, you're gaining weight? I don't understand, Yeah.
Yeah. And, something that you touched on here is that like this, knowing what boundaries you need to set, knowing what you need to do starts with knowing yourself first. And like, I think it's really important to understand how you get to know yourself, because you can't properly set up boundaries. You can't properly set a plan that moves you in the right direction. You can't make sure that you're in the correct surroundings until you really start to know who you are. And that starts with that self-inventory. But I think from a practical application, just to like let people know that these would be 3 things that I would suggest to people who are trying to figure out who you are. And look, I'm not going to give you the Southern Baptist Christian, well, you find your identity in Christ. You know who you are in Jesus, and that's all you need to know, boy. Like, no, I'm going to hit you with 3 things that have actually genuinely helped me. Not that God hasn't helped me, but these are 3 real practical things that you can do outside of what the Bible says that are not against the Bible, but just 3 different things. First one would be getting a good independent counselor. And in that counseling, this would be, I guess, 1B. So I guess it's 2 things, but 1B, 1A and 1B. Mm-hmm. Going to counseling and working on your origin story, because you don't really know who you are until you start to go back and figure out who you were and how you got to the place that you are now. And the origin story is essentially you laying it out all on paper, or, recording voice memos and listening to them, but figuring out how you got to where you are. Mm-hmm. Your family, who they were, and the decisions that your family made that led to you making decisions that make you who you are. Mm-hmm. So counseling and an origin story. And if you're not interested in going to counseling, or maybe, you can't afford it, go online and for like $100, type in self-authoring Jordan Peterson. And if you can write, this will teach you how to write, even if you don't know how. It is a series of prompts that make you work through your origin story in a safe and effective way that allow you to kind of come to conclusions on where you are. So I've purchased this program and I have started to work on it. And the self-authoring program starts with past authoring, present authoring, and future authoring. And the idea is writing your future by understanding your past and your present. And you can start wherever you want. But I can tell you that starting with your past and writing down, like, for example, the first one starts with like writing down, I think 5 or 7 key memories in your life that have to do with a certain topic. Like maybe it's disappointment or discipline or whatever it is. And you write these out, and you can be as detailed as you want or not detailed. And then the next step is expounding on those, and then expounding on those. And then you end up writing 10, 20 pages of material out about your past. And then you start to kind of connect the dots. And that's what you can really do in counseling. That's what you can do when you set the right people around you. Is I can tell Mike, hey, I'm struggling with this. And Mike, because he's taken the time and put in the work, he knows what questions to ask. Mm-hmm. He knows, and he can look at me and be like, I don't think you're really giving it a go. That's why it pisses me off when Mike says something to me like, if you just smiled a little more, because I know that comes from a place where he's seeing something and he knows from experience. It's not like he's just trying to come up and give me some BS advice from no experience.
I think you're just being an asshole right now. Just leave me alone.
Yeah.
How dare you?
But yeah, so beginning to know yourself is a very important step in understanding what needs to change.
Yeah.
You can't change something that you don't know. It's like if I gave you an engine and told you to modify this engine, well, you would first have to understand how the engine works. Mm-hmm. You can't just go in and start loosening and tightening things and changing stuff up. If you don't even understand oxygen to fuel conversion ratios and stuff like that, well, you're SOL. Yeah. You got to start at the basics.
Yeah.
And that's, who am I?
Yeah.
How did I become who I am?
So I'm going to say an absolute statement right now.
And Zach, we all love absolutes.
Zach is probably not going to like what I have to say, but I'm sure he'll have something to say about it.
I don't like any absolutes.
So there is no such thing as partial freedom. That goes with peace and love. And the reason why I say that is, have you ever heard of one country invading another and they don't invade the whole country? Or that we can equate that to addiction. Have you ever seen someone who's clean and sober and they didn't change their whole life to be happy? That goes with mental health. It's like if you're giving everything that you have and you're trying to be a different person, are you going to give it everything? Or are you going to give it everything, but you're not going to touch one area? I struggled with that for a really long time. And the one thing I held on to was anger. And the reason why I held on to anger is because I thought it kept people away from me and it kept people safe. It wasn't until Pastor Tracy was teaching Clean, Sober, Saved, and she said, you have to evolve as a person. What once kept you strong now is making you weak. I was like, and I'm sitting there, I'm listening to it, and she said, so when you were in survival mode and you needed that one tool to keep you sharp and get you to a place where you can start to be healthy, you can start to love yourself, you can't keep on holding on to that one tool. Your tool has to evolve into something else. And then I was like, wow. And I held on to anger for a really long time because when I get pissed off, people don't want to be around me, you know? And that was also like anger bred like false confidence in me. Yeah. When people saw that I was pissed off, people kept away from me. I was safe, you know? And then, but then also like it kept my daughters away from me when I had a certain demeanor when I looked pissed off. And then, you know, that caused me to have a resting bitch face, you know? And he was like, well, he looks pissed off, so he must be pissed off, you know? And then I wasn't pissed off anymore, but I still had the look like I was pissed off. And I was like, are you pissed off or you just look like that? You know? And then you're trying to change who you are as a person. You're trying to evolve. You're trying to be resilient. You're trying to change all this stuff. And you're just like, man, what's the deal here? Why can't I go from point A to point B and you're still looking for breakthrough? You know? And it's like, I don't understand what's happening, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of like you're watching your son and, for Eli, he does all these puzzles all the time. He's into a puzzle kick. And I have a really bad habit of trying to get in there and trying to show him which puzzle pieces go where, then having him figure it out for himself.
Yeah.
It's like, and Jenny's like, just stop it. Don't do that. I'm just like, you know, I don't do that because I'm not trying to help him. I'm trying to do that to help him. But in the grand scheme of things, he has to do it for himself. So when you are trying to put this thing all together, there are people, I guarantee, that you're putting around in your life who you think are there to help you, but are actually handicapping you, that are showing you the way, but are also doing things for you.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to tell you this quick story. Okay. So I have a relationship with my mom. And for a really long time, I would go to my mom for guidance. I'm just going to say I've been married for 21 years. I have a great relationship with my mom. My mom was like the catalyst for faith in our home, like all this stuff, right? So I went to, I was working out with a friend of mine, and he recently had to put a boundary around his mom. And I'm like, well, why is that? Why did you have to do that? He said, because sometimes you give people permission where you shouldn't have permission.
Yep.
And for my mom knew me and she raised me until I left home, which was 25. I left home when I was, Minnesota, I'll say. Left Minnesota when I was 25. And my mom had access to all that. So when I left home and I was in the military for 18 and a half years, right? So my mom doesn't know the man I become, right? So since she doesn't know the man I become, she doesn't have the access anymore, right?
Yeah.
And me giving her partial access, you know, she doesn't have the ability. She's my mom. She loves me no matter what. But she doesn't have the ability to love me who I am now because she hasn't, number one, seen me on a consistent basis. She doesn't have access like she had before when I was younger, right?
Yeah.
So where you are now and where you are going, the people who had access before need to evolve to the place that you're going, you know? Freaking Rocky. So.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I think that parents are a really tough thing for us to kind of get away from. And it's not just men, it's men and women, but like getting away from needing that parents' approval for stuff is tough. And like, it's even tougher now, especially because financially it's so difficult to live on your own as a young adult. So like speaking to, you know, these young military men and women who are going off on your own for the first time, and you're going to basic, and then it's after basic, you're getting
advanced
what are you
training.
getting?
Yeah.
Like, you know, are you going back home?
Yeah.
Are you being sent off right away? Like, well, if you got to go back home, well, you're a different person now in an old environment, and people are going to have an old view of who you are and what type of person you are, but you're now changed, altered. You are reconstructed. And these old people that have a old view of you don't understand the new person. And that's where having, you know, if they are a type of person that you still want in your life, you have to set a new set of boundaries. You have to set a new parameter around those relationships, that they're still beneficial to all parties involved. And sometimes those have to be strict, and sometimes they can be looser and freer, but you know, in all reality, you are still you, and you are accountable to yourself before you are accountable to anybody else, because your accountability to anybody means jack shit if you can't be accountable to yourself.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting what you said about like going back home. I find it very interesting. I know like this is a different climate to like when we were in high school and all this stuff, because like the climate that we live in nowadays, there are people who are living at home well into their well
into their 30s,
you know, and I'm just like, wow, that's interesting, you know, because when I graduated high school, I left home the day after I graduated high school.
That was my plan. That didn't work.
Yeah. And I was like, you know, and you're trying to figure all this stuff out on your own. And I learned like my parents were freaking geniuses with finance, you know, because when you live out on your own, there's rent, there's groceries, there's insurance. If you have a car, there's a car payment. You have to put gas in it. And it's like, man, what the heck? I got to eat sometime too, you know, and then you want to have a social life. And it's like, man, I got to work like 2 jobs to have a social life. What the hell am I going, you know? So, you know, as you're evolving as a person, you know, there are different people who are going to be in your life for seasons too.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, you know, there are people that have been in my life when I was in the military that I don't talk to anymore, but they were instrumental to like grooming who I became as a leader in the military. I don't talk to them anymore. And that even goes with today. It's like, I think Zach said it best. You can always take something from somebody, you know. None of us are an expert with stuff, you know. I think it's like when you have this pride that, you know, certain people can't help you. I always like look at like boxers, you know. It's like way back in the day when Mike Tyson was like on his, you know, he would go in there and like
man on the planet for a while.
Oh yeah, he'd have these boxing matches where it would last like a minute and a half, just because he was bored.
That was a good fight for the person fighting Mike Tyson if they made it a minute and a half sometimes.
Yeah. And the thing is he was fighting Buster Douglas in, I think, Japan or something, and Buster Douglas beat him. But the thing is what Buster Douglas had is he had a belief in himself, and Buster Douglas buried his mom the 2 or 3 days before he left for that fight. And he told his mom that he was going to beat Mike Tyson. And I think his mom is the only one that believed in him, except Buster Douglas believed it because he told his mom and he said, I believe it. The thing is you have to believe you're going to change too if you're going to start setting up all this stuff.
Yes.
You know? And if you don't believe in yourself, how am I going to expect anybody else to believe in me either? And Mike and no one was betting on Buster Douglas to even knock him down.
Yeah. I mean, shoot, just this last weekend in the UFC, to show, I guess, you know, where we are in the world at this time. Sean Strickland was fighting Israel Adesanya for the middleweight title.
Too, yeah.
He was a negative 450 underdog at the day of the fight. And I think it when the fight started, the betting closed at negative like 470 or 480, the largest underdog in history.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not to disparage or talk about how, you know, a fighter, but Israel Adesanya looked like a shell of himself in that fight compared to Sean Strickland, who, whatever he did to prepare for that fight, he won 4 of the 5 rounds, and he looked like he put on a clinic, a striking clinic.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone in the world, 80% of the money that was bet on that fight was against Sean Strickland. And he went in there and won. He went in there and won, dominated that fight, 49-46 scoring. And in all reality, that was very biased scoring because how they score things is it's 10-9. So if you win the round, you get a 10. If you lose the round, you get a 9. Some of those rounds, if you were to actually score them for how dominant Sean Strickland was, they would be 10-8 rounds, 10-7 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were very dominant rounds. So
yeah, there was a round, I forget which one it was, but there was a round where I don't even think the dude even hit Sean Strickland. I was like, well, I'm like, maybe it was the third. I was like,
I think it was the third.
I was like watching him like, dude, he's not even being hit.
Yeah.
I think Israel was like swinging at air.
It's like what it looked like.
Yeah. I was like, there's no way. I was like, this thing's over. I was like, this is ridiculous right now.
Yeah. And so all that to say, the entire world can be betting against you. But if you believe in yourself and you have a game plan, it doesn't matter how much of the money is against you. It doesn't matter what the odds are. You are in control of your destiny. And the nice thing about this is you're not having to go up against Stylebender. You're not having to go up against one of the most prolific. I mean, Stylebender has been in the UFC for like since 2018, and he's had more championship fights than any other fighter in that time period. He's been a very active fighter, and maybe he needs a rest. So this might be good for him. I mean, the dude's fought for the title. He's had 3 different title fights this year where other champions have fought once, maybe twice. And we still have 3.5 months left in the year, or 3 months. So like looking at this, it does not matter what is against you. You're against yourself. Like at the end of the day, that's who you're fighting. And you have to determine who your enemy is to overcome them. So knowing yourself, knowing your enemy allows you to set up your battle plan. And I'm not saying that you should be at enmity with yourself, but you have to kind of view it that way, as that you are a target that you have to take down. You have to know your weaknesses. You have to know your strengths, and you have to develop a game plan and surround yourself with people to help you develop that game plan to essentially break down those barriers, break down those walls, and win this battle. And those people and those things are going to change based on who your opponent is at the time. Sometimes you're fighting a striker. Sometimes you're fighting a grappler or a wrestler. You have to adapt to your environment.
Yeah. So I know a lot of coaches, they'll say, you got to practice like you play, you know? And in the military, it's like, how you practice, that's how you're going to fight, you know? And when you're trying to put yourself back together, you can't be like passive in doing this. You know, you can't, you got to know your weaknesses. You have to know your strengths. But if you're going to be passive You know, how are you really going to look at this and you'd be like, okay, because when I put myself together, I was like, no, I'm not going. I can't do this. I can't do that. You know, I had to be in a place of constant healing and constant like growing. And the thing is when you're growing, you're putting yourself together. Number one, it's messy. Number two, it's painful. And number three, it's like, you know, you're climbing out of a hole here.
A very deep hole.
Yeah,
a
very deep hole. And you're just like, you're the one that's got to do the work. You're the one that has to do the work. Healing is messy. Having integrity when you're putting stuff together is messy. You know, I don't think like all these UFC fighters and like, you know, I don't think like they go into like the cage when they're about to fight and be like, man, this is going to be a cakewalk. I think they go in there, they're expecting, you know, they're expecting everything because you underestimate your opponent when you're going to go into this thing is like, it's brutal. And I can tell you, like, when we went to war in Iraq, we didn't have the best intelligence either.
And a lot of people, and this isn't to claim to be like a military person who understands military theory, but like there was not a very high opinion of the, are you talking about Iraqi freedom or are you talking about Afghanistan invasion?
Sort of both.
Okay. Because either one is pretty similar, but like, it's kind of like when the opinion of the English noblemen and the Scots, they looked at them like farmers, these, you know, fighting with pitchforks. It's like there was a different, like, if you underestimate your enemy, what's going to happen? Yeah.
And the thing is when we went into Afghanistan, the people from Afghanistan were already war tested. They were already at war with Russia for like 10 to 12 years before 9/11 happened. And then we went into Afghanistan and they're already war tested. They're already ready to go.
And trained by us.
Yeah, and trained by us. So they already know our tactics.
Yeah.
It's like you going to war with yourself here. And when we went to a war with Iraq, we didn't have the best intelligence going in there because we were under the impression what happened with Desert Storm is going to happen with this.
Yeah.
And that, you know, going back to when you're putting yourself together and you're trying to have integrity, what worked in the past isn't going to work in the present.
Yeah.
Like what worked for me in kindergarten isn't going to work for me when I'm 50.
Yeah.
And what worked for me before the cell phone age isn't going to work for me now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like,
so yeah, having the proper perspective and the proper, like, how deep am I going to go in this here?
Yeah. And this is all kind of points back to what you say in here about, you know, understanding and checking your surroundings. Like, if the cell phone didn't exist currently, but everything else remained the same, just that one little piece of our present society would greatly alter the way that we handle our day-to-days. It would greatly change the way that we are working through things.
Let me just ask this one question, not to deter this whole surrounding thing. If we didn't have the cell phone and social media didn't exist, right? What do you think mental illness would be at right now, presently? In your opinion?
I will start by saying that I do think there is a significant contributing factor to mental health and social media. And this was outlined by the Attorney General of the United States in children. And the thing is that if you look at the numbers with the adults, it's much different. But I think that there would be I think that the ability to transfer and pass information in an unrestricted format has definitely led to some rises in poor mental health. And a lot of it comes down to less to do with the social media and more to do with our poor regulation of ourselves. Because at the end of the day, we are very childlike, even as adults. And we allow ourselves to think that what we're seeing on the internet is real, even though we know it's not real, but we still kind of let it seem real.
Right.
And we play this little comparison game.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happens on the internet that helps a lot of people.
Yes.
But I think like the habits that we have developed, and this is why kind of like I'm bringing this back to like your surroundings, because the habits that you develop and the distractions that you allow yourself to have, like they just like stunt your growth as a person, and you're going and you're like trying to put yourself together and like doing all this stuff. And you're just like, well, I can put that on the shelf. I'm just going to pick up my phone for an hour or two.
Yeah.
And then, and then you're just like, that forms a habit. It's why maybe I'll give my son, like, let him watch my cell phone for maybe an hour a week. Maybe he doesn't get a tablet. He doesn't get nothing like that. And I find that very interesting because, when I'm seeing all these people that are in charge of social media, their kids don't have cell phones. Their kids don't have tablets. Their kids don't have like all this stuff. Their kids have puzzles. Their kids have, regular toys like everybody else. Their kids have to play outside. And it's so easy as a parent to be like, here you go, knock yourself out for a couple hours.
Oh yeah. It's the classic drug addict or drug dealer's adage of don't get high on your own supply.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you doing to yourself with this? Honestly.
Yeah. And look, like you said, there is good that comes out of it. But at the end of the day, when we're looking at social media, when we're looking at the information that's available to us online, like it is not necessarily inherently good. And because there is so much out there and available, you have to do more research to find the good. Like you have to do more, you have to spend more time and you have to get the information kind of dissected to a different point, because I can pull up 2 medical journals that say completely opposite things. And these are both supposedly done by experts. And it's because if you understand what they're allowed to do in order to put that information out there, it's like, oh, well, they can throw out all the negative studies and they can only put out the information they want you to see there. It's like, well, so can everybody else. Like I can only put out the information that I want you to see about me online so that you have a certain vision and image of who I am. Or I can do this podcast and be extremely open and vulnerable and let you see every part of me and not really give a crap what you think, but at the same time do it because I would rather you see something true and unfiltered than this very filtered, highly palatable version of what it is that life is, because it's not easy. Like, and a lot of people want you to be like, oh yeah, if you just download my little pamphlet, here's how you can create a store online that'll generate you 6 figures of income passively. It's like, if it was really that easy, we'd all do it. And plus, what are we doing then? We're all just spending our own money on each other's stuff. Like,
yeah, if we were all successful, we'd all be millionaires and driving Ferraris. That's just isn't reality. But the reason why I was saying that, especially when you said the surroundings and I brought up the cell phone, is you can easily pick up your cell phone and type in something, but you can easily find the answer that you want to find.
Yes.
Because, so a lot of people know this who are in sports. Recently, Aaron Rodgers, he ruptured his Achilles tendon on the 4th play.
Yeah.
Now, let me just say that I think that sucks for him personally, but this year and next year, he's going to make $100 million, right? So the 4 plays that he did on Monday Night Football,
$25 million
$25 million a play. Does that suck? And he's going to have to go through this rehab? Yeah, it does. But if you're going to ask me a question, would you do $100 million and rupture your Achilles tendon?
You can cut my foot off.
Yeah, I will. So, you
can kill both of them.
Yeah.
Go ahead, do it right now.
Yeah.
See if I care for $100 million.
Yeah, but the reason why I say that is, not to make light of that or anything, but the social media world was going berserk about Aaron Rodgers going down.
Yeah.
But when you weed through like what people are saying and what they thought it was, and this guy's a wuss or figures Aaron Rodgers, Jets fans are like, well, it's the Jets. That's why it happened. We're cursed. But if you weed through all this stuff, there were doctors and physical therapists that reviewed the play, and they said, the way that he went down, you could see that it popped, and you could see it.
Oh yeah, and the video in slow motion, you can watch it pop and roll. Yeah,
so it said you could see it. So I say that is because you have to discern the information that you get, because everyone's going to have an opinion on how you need to put your life back together, how you need to have boundaries, how you need to be healthy. Everyone's going to have an opinion. You really have to discern about who you're going to listen to.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're just sitting there, and it's kind of like, so I've been to Ford's in the last 10 years. I'll give you an example. And in the 10 years, there were, I would say, an average of like 2 or 3 guys a men's retreat that they were looking for a Hail Mary to put their self back together. They wanted to get back to God, and they wanted to be a better husband, and they wanted to save their marriage, right? So when they were doing this, 30 guys, right? Guess how many of them got divorced?
I don't want to take a guess.
28. 28 got divorced. And the thing is I saw at the end of that retreat, I saw all the guys like motivated, had a plan, like all this stuff. And I came to him later. I'm like, what happened? It's like, well, it's just too big. I didn't think it was possible. The thing is when you're going after this, you have to have a really good excuse not to go for it, especially when you're like, your goal is at stake.
Yeah.
When my goal was at stake, it was my marriage, and it was like my family. Am I going to let the hurt win here, or am I going to be like ruthlessly going for it? Because in that last paragraph, it says about no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you kind of have to be yourself. I think that's in the last paragraph. I think I'm paraphrasing it. But
yeah,
what are you going to do? You have to be yourself no matter where you go. Especially coming to Troy, Missouri. Me and Zach have this in common, that we think that we don't fit here. And you have to be yourself in a place where you think you don't fit either.
Yeah, it's more than likely not going to feel comfortable for a while. You're stepping into a new role. You're stepping into a new life, essentially. Like how I try to explain it to people is if you think that you can go and live, like you lose a weight. Let's say you change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you do when you're done? Do you just go back to the old habits? It's like, what the hell do you think is going to happen if you go back and you start eating pizza and burritos and burgers and stop exercising? Like, you think, oh, the weight's just going to stay off because I lost it. It's like, no, you're going to turn right back into the person you were. So you have to burn the proverbial ships at the shore and start the new life on the new land, and never allow yourself access back to that old thing, because inevitably you will wind up in the same place that you were. And too many people, and too often do I find that people don't understand that like you can't go back to doing the old things. You can't go back to being the old person and expect that like things are going to stay the same as they are now after making these changes. And it's very easy to fall back into those old comfortable habits and old comfortable lifestyles, especially if you continue to surround yourself with those things, which is why we keep harping on this. Yeah. Boundaries, surroundings, and all this stuff. It's super important.
You know what I find interesting is when you know the solution that you should do. For example, I'm not trying to, I'll never like bag on my wife, whatever, right? When I go to the store, I buy exactly what's on the list. I don't like buy like any of this stuff. You know, my wife shared one of those reels with me. It was a wife and a husband. And the wife is getting pissed off. The husband is like, why are you pissed off? And the husband says, every time I piss you off, you don't fill the buggy. You know, you don't fill the cart. But every time you go in there and you're in a good mood, you just buy everything. You're just filling the cart. The thing is I know that if me and Jenny eat a good meal or we eat something and we're not hungry when we go to the store, we buy exactly what's on the list. You know what the solution is. Right? But when you go to the store, like, yeah, this is a good idea. This is a good idea.
Oh, yeah.
Or shopping with Eli. And I have to, when I shop with Eli, I know I can't go through the dessert aisle because he's going to throw a conniption as soon as he sees a cupcake. And he's like the worst. You know, he's the worst. I'm just like, Dad, I need a popsicle right now. I need an ice cream cone, you know, and then I buy him an ice cream cone and then he has like 2 licks. He's like, here, you eat it. I'm just like, you know, I'm trying to be fit. I'm trying to do all this stuff. My son's giving me junk food. It's freaking amazing.
Yeah. And to be honest, we're not much different than children.
No,
we just choose worse things for ourselves, but we're the same way. We're walking through the aisle of life and we're looking at everything that's on the shelves and what everyone tells us is on the shelves because we're on social media and they make it look so appetizing and then we get it. And unfortunately, it doesn't satisfy.
Yeah.
Just like it doesn't satisfy. And we try to give it back, but there's no one to hand it to.
Yeah.
I hate ending these things because I feel like they can always go at an infinite pace of trying to keep going, but I kind of have to pee and I feel like we reached a pretty good point. Do you have anything else that you want to touch on with this one before we wrap it up?
No, I think the only thing that I really want to say is, you know, if you're going to do this for real, you know, you got to go hard after it. If you want to do this for real, you have to, have the hard boundary, like Zach said, of like, you know, people are close to you, you got to let them in. You know, people who are further away, you know, you're not as close to them. People are further away from that, you're not as close to them. So I think like having integrity about the people who are around your boundaries you hit that spot on when you're talking about that. That's really like the thought that I had.
Yeah, just I guess the way that I would kind of describe it is emotional socialism. And like from an economic standpoint, you can be a socialist in your own home. We all share what my money pays for everybody in the home and your money, we all contribute to this fund. But that socialism doesn't extend outside of the home. You continue to get less and less social and communist with your things the further you travel away from your home. And you have to do that emotionally, is like the things that you allow to be in your home, whether that be your literal home or your figurative home. You have to be careful with who you let into that place, because that place needs to be an open, free place. And like, it's not like, oh, I'm having someone come visit. It's who you let occupy that space, who you let live in that space. And you just have to be very careful with who you let have full access for your own safety. And this isn't this isn't just for recovering people. This is for everybody, but especially for recovering people. Next week we have chapter 6, forgiveness.
Ooh,
the free gift of forgiveness
that's a long one too.
Constantly needing to be bought. And never run out of that.
Oh man.
So we'll get into that one a little bit, and appreciate you all for joining the fire.
Yeah. Peace.